Hello, so today we'll be building a e-commerce application in Nextjs using Tailwindcss. Our website will contain a Navbar, a HeroSection with a on-click slider, a GallerySection, a ProductSection. We have testimonials from customers. We'll include a newsletter and footer. We also have a product detail page that shows the individual description, name, category, price of each product item. And our application will also be fully responsive with a responsive, friendly mobile menu, and all of the sites that we had on the desktop version just viewable within a mobile view. So if this is something that you may be interested in building, stay tuned and I'll walk you through how I built this application step by step, as this will be the front end for the full stack application that we'll eventually be building later on in a separate video. So we'll start with creating our Nextjs app. px create next app at latest, and we'll go my app. And for this project, we're not using TypeScript. We'll say yes to ESLint, yes to Tailwind, no to SRC. We will use the app router, and default alias we'll keep at no. Now let's cd into the my app directory. Now bring down our terminal, and in the directory, let's go into the app directory first, and inside of the global CSS, let's remove everything from within it. Inside of our layout.js, let's remove the custom Google font, and let's rename our site to bike site, and we'll remove the font from the body tag and clean this up a little bit as well. So let's start with the components. Well, I'm sorry, one more thing. Inside of the page.js, let's update the main HTML tag so that it's just main, and we'll just put home page here. And let's get something on our window. So we'll go back to the terminal, and we'll just add a new one here and close that one, cd back into it. And let's run npm run dev, and we'll go ahead and start our local host, and once it's up and going, we should be able to see our content. And while that's working, let's go ahead and create a components directory. So inside of our components directory, let's add for right now, let's add our navbar.js. And this will obviously represent our navbar, and we will need to bring in the use client, and let's create a fractional component, and we'll update it to say header. Now we want our header to carry across multiple windows, or navbar, excuse me. So I will go ahead and add in the navbar in the layout.js file. If we save it, we see it here on our window. And we'll add a footer as well for right now. And we'll update the tags to the footer tag and save it. And let's go into our layout.js and let's add in our footer. And if we save the file, we'll see that on our home page, we have the header and footer. The reason I added these in our layout.js is because we will have multiple pages on our site, and I want the header and footer to carry over to those pages. So for right now, let's go ahead and add in the additional components that we'll need. So let's add in the rest of our components, but they'll be added on our page.js file. So the first component that we'll add is a box, and this is just going to be a reusable component that'll allow us to keep a standard box across multiple sections without creating the same box over and over. Next, let's add in the HeroSection, and of course this will go on our main home screen. So we'll update our div tag to a section, and we'll just make a HeroSection there, and let's just add it on our inside of our page.js. We'll add this HeroSection, and we can remove the image, we won't need it. And we see we have the HeroSection showing up. Next, let's add a GallerySection, and we'll update the div tag in it as well. Save the file and add it inside of our page.js. Next up, we'll add a ProductSection. And the ProductSection will actually have a product card that will go inside of the section, but I'm not going to worry about adding that. I'm not going to worry about adding that component just yet. When we get to this portion of the code, then we'll add in the product card. But for right now, we'll just add the section just so we can have that section show up here. Next up, we'll have the testimonial section. No, I'm sorry. Next up, we'll have the showcase item. Ooh, it's in the wrong folder. We can get away with this one just being a regular component. So we'll add in showcase and we'll import it in our page.js. Next up, we'll have the testimonial section. And we'll update this, save the file, add it to our page.js. And then last but not least, no, we're good because the footer is already here. Okay, so this is going to represent the client side or the front end of our website. So we'll work on that first, and then we'll go in and we'll connect it to the back end, hook up our cart, and carry on from there. So next up, we'll add some global. We'll add some global styling to bring some consistency. We'll add some global styling to bring some consistency on our page. So now that we have our sections in place, let's go ahead and add in some global styling. So in the Tailwindcss file, we can remove the background image. We don't need it. And instead, I'm going to paste in some colors that I'm going to use for the site. This is just personal preference. Feel free to utilize any colors that fits your desire. And in the globals.css file, I want to add in some additional styling here as well. That's a little easier to manage at the body level versus individual components. So first, we'll set the font weight to 400. Then we'll set the font size to 16 pixels. The line height will be 24 pixels. The font family, I'm going to use monospace, and I'm going to do some letter spacing between each letter. And I like to set the overflow on the x-axis to hidden, just so the page isn't so flexible or easy to move. And once I save the file, this is what it looks like. So with this, we are ready to go ahead and jump in and start coding our header first. So inside of the components directory, actually, it should already be open. Let's just close these files out that we have open already. So let's add in one additional dependency for our navbar, and that is the React icons. So let's in our terminal, let's open up a new terminal and cd into the directory that's holding the project. And inside of it, we'll type in the command npm I react-icons and press enter. And once it's finished installing, we can go ahead and set up our navbar. So inside of our navbar, let's start with a few imports. First will be useState. This will help manage the state of our mobile menu. Next will be link from NextLink. This will help with client-side navigation. We'll need to bring in some React icons next. We're going to use the shopping cart, the bars and times, which is the menu open, and the X for the menu close. We'll need image from NextImage. This is because we're going to have a logo that will be held in NextImage. And with that, let's go ahead and bring in our logo now. So we'll say import. And what I have is I have my logo listed here in the public directory. Feel free to add one in as well. So we'll import and we'll call it logo. And we'll say this is from /public/logo.png. And the final import we'll need is the box component. So we'll need to create our box component before we import it. So in the box.js file, let's start by creating the React functional component. And we'll need to pass in some props because this will be a reusable component. We're going to pass in the children and class name. And in the return statement, we'll have a div. And our div class name, we're going to start with the temporal literal. And in it, we'll give the width of full. We want the max width to be 1280 pixels. That way the content is within that parameter. We want to give some padding on the x-axis and set the margin to auto. And we'll conditionally render that if we don't get anything in, we want to just pass in a blank class name. But we know we just won't use it if it's not being utilized. And then inside of this div, we want to pass in children. So if we save the file and go back to our navbar.js, let's import the box from /box, and that will care for all of the imports that we'll need for our navbar. Now let's bring in some additional functions to bring some activity to our header. First, inside of the navbar function, let's start by creating a state variable for our mobile menu. We're going to set the initial state to false, but this is basically what's going to be used to manage the state of our mobile menu. Then we'll create our menu links. These links will go on the navbar and represent the pages. So we'll have a home page, an about page, a contact page, and we're also going to have a product detail page, but we'll create that off of a product item. And then the last functionality or function that we want to create or add here is a toggle mobile menu. This function will just update the mobile menu state to toggle it from false to true. Okay, so now we are ready to move on to our JSX. So in the header, let's give it a class name, and we want to set the width to full. We want the text to be a primary color. We want the Z index to be 20, and we want it to be sticky up top. This will give us access to our navbar regardless to where we are within the page. So if you scroll down the page, you'll still have access to the navbar menu links. Now within the header, we want to bring in or use the box component. This way our menu or header or navbar, I should say, will be contained within the box. Will be contained within the parameters of the box component. And then inside of box, we know it takes in props, so we have to pass in a class name. And we want to set the height to 100 pixels. We want the direction to be flex. We want to give space between each div or each component of our navbar. We want the item centered, and we want to give padding on the x-axis. So the first component we want to add in is our logo, and our logo is going to be wrapped in a link tag. So we'll start by creating the link first. Our link will need a href, and we want to direct it back to the home page. We want to give it a class name for some styling. Setting the width property is the main thing we want to do, and set it to 120 pixels. Within our link tag, we want to bring in the image component from Next, and we want to set the height and the width to 200, and we're going to set the src to the logo that we imported, And if we save the file, we'll see that we now have our logo displayed here. So the next section we want to add is the menu links or menu items that we have here. So we're going to place these outside or underneath the closing link tag. And we'll start with the div, and we'll give the div a class name. And we want this to be hidden, and we're coding this so we want the state of this to be hidden on small devices, but on medium devices and larger. We want the menu links or menu items to be presented in the middle of our nav bar. So we'll set the direction to flex, and we want to give each menu item some space on the x-axis. So now we'll need to utilize some JavaScript in order to map over each link. We're going to call each item in that array link, and for each link we're also going to give it an index. We want to create a link, and we want to give it a key of index, and we want the href to be set to the link so that it goes to this URL. And then we also want to give it a class name, and basically this class name is just going to give the menu links some styling when we hover over it. That way you know that we've hovered. And inside of the link, we want the text to show up as the link text. And if we save the file, let's go ahead and add a cursor pointer here as well. So we won't see this right now because the menu is in the web page is in the mobile state. But we'll take a look at it in just a moment. Now the next section we want to add is the action section, and this is where our cart icon with the quantity and username will be. So underneath the closing div that we just had or added, let's add another div, and in it let's give it a class name of flex, and let's center the items and give some space on the x-axis. Next we'll add a span, and in the span we'll give it a class name, and we want to set this one to relative because we're going to have a positioning of absolute in just a moment. And inside of this span we want to give it a shopping cart, and if we save our file, we see the shopping cart appears there on the screen. And within the same span, we're going to have another span. This span is going to have the number of items within the cart. I'm going to hard code the number 3 just so we can have something visual for right now, but this will eventually be dynamically passed. And for styling, we'll give it a position of absolute. That way we can specifically state where we want this item to be placed, and then we'll position it to the top right. We'll give it a background color of gray, set the text color, give it some background padding, set the width and height of it, and make sure that we center the items on the X and Y axis. So if we save this, we'll see that it now appears slightly above the cart. Outside of the closing span, we want to add another span. This one is going to represent the username. We're going to hard code it for right now. So we'll give it a class name, and we'll just set the cursor to pointer, and within it we'll just pass in username. So if you save the file, you should now see that we have the cart and username here on our window. Now we'll need to add our mobile menu. So underneath this closing div, let's add another div, and we'll give it a class name of hidden because this only needs to appear on smaller devices. And we'll give inside of the div, we'll pass in a button. This button is going to have the on-click handler that's going to toggle the mobile menu function that we created so that it can update the state. And within the button, we want to access or utilize some JavaScript to conditionally render the mobile menu or X icon depending upon the state. We save this file, we'll see that the menu now appears, and if we click the button, we see that it toggles from the menu hamburger icon to the X. So the last section to our nav bar is the mobile menu items. We need to conditionally render these. So underneath the closing box tag, this can be presented, or the code can be added outside of the box. Let's add in some JavaScript, and we want to conditionally render if we're in the mobile menu, or if it's the mobile menu, we want to present a div. And basically what we have here is we want the background to be our primary color. We want the text that the items that will be on to be white, and we want some padding and space on the y-axis. And then we want to use JavaScript to loop over the menu links, and we want to use the map function. We'll name them the same way we did here earlier, And in it, we want to pass in link. We'll give it a key with the index or index with key. The href will be set back to the link. And in it, we'll give it a class name just to give it some styling. And inside of our link, we'll set the name to the link text. So if we save this file, we see that we now have a mobile menu that on click, it toggles. And if we go to the desktop version, we see that we have the 3-section menu with our action items on the right, our menu links in the middle, and our logo on the far left. So let's close out our open files, and inside of our components folder, let's click on the HeroSection.js. Now inside of our HeroSection, let's start by bringing in useState from React. We're going to use it to help manage the state of our image hero slider. Now let's add some functionality inside of our HeroSection. We'll start by bringing in images. I didn't add these in the public directory, but feel free to do so if you wish. I ran out of options on the site I pulled the images from, so I just grabbed some from pixels.com. Next up, we want to create a state variable to manage the current index of our image as we're toggling through the state. We'll also need to create the functionality to update the current image. And we'll also need to create a function named handle.click so that when the user clicks on one of the 3 dots, they'll have the option to toggle to that image. Now within our section, we want to add a class name, and in it we want to set the class name to relative because we'll have some absolute positioning within this section, and we want to have the overflow set to hidden. Now we can remove the HeroSection text and let's add another div. This will be the div to hold our image slider. We'll give it a class name and set the height, the width of our image. And as you can see, we set the background color to gray of 900. Now within this div, before we bring in our images, let's add I want to add in a little bit of tint to the section so that the images will be somewhat tinted and the text that's on the image will stand out more. It'll look a little better once we start to add in more of the content in the HeroSection. Outside or underneath that closing div, let's add in an image tag, and the image tag is going to have a src of images, and we want it to be the current image, which will be based on the one that's selected. We'll need to add a alt of hero background in the event nothing shows up, and the class name, we want to set it to object cover and give it a height and width of full. If we save the file, we'll notice that we now have an image that's populated, and it is one of the images within the image array, so that's a good thing. Underneath that image tag, underneath that div, let's add another div. This div is going to represent the dots that we'll click on to change the image. So within the div, let's add a class name, and we basically want to start by styling the circle dots, and within the div, what we want is for each image within the image array, we want to map over it, and we want to create this dot, and we'll give it an index, or the index will be index. And then for each image, we want to map over the image, and we want to create a dot, which will be represented by the button. And this dot will have the on click handler so that when it's clicked, it's going to update the image state, and it's going to change that image src, remember, right here. And then we also going to give it a class name just for styling so that when we take a look at it, we'll see what it looks like. And if you notice right here, this is the image slider dots, and if you click on them, they are currently toggling through our image array that we have listed right here. And the other thing I want to point out is that if you're following along and you with the series, you're going to see that we also have the navbar is being displayed even as we scroll down our hero section. So with that, we'll go ahead and add in the text next. So now let's focus on the text that needs to go on our hero section. So underneath this div, we're going to add another div. This initial div is just for styling purposes, so we're going to give it a class name, and basically what I wanted to accomplish here was just have a little bit of border showing a little bit of separation here on the hero section. Outside of that div, because we're not going to have anything inside of it, so it's going to close. So outside of that closed div, we're going to add another div, and we'll give it a class name. And here we're just setting the position of our title text, and that title text will be a H1 with the class name of text will be 5XL, and then on medium devices we want to adjust it, and we want the font to be bold, and we want to give a little bit of margin bottom. So if we add in our site name, which is going to be 2 wheels, this is what that text looks like in our hero section. So we want to add in a description next, and I'm going to put that in a p tag and give it a class name, and we'll style the text a little bit, and we'll just put the actual content of the text. We'll just say discover the latest cycling trends, and if we save it, we see that the font size is a little smaller. And if you want, we could change the color of this text as well so it stands out a little bit, and we can go font bold. There we go. And that cares for the p tag. So now we'll just need to add a shop now button. So now underneath our p tag, let's add us a shop now. Let's add a shop now button. So we'll add a button, and we'll give it some styling, and we'll have the background on this one be secondary, so it'll match this text. And we'll add some additional styling just so that it functions as designed. And if we add in the code of shop now, this is what we get. And if we hover over it, we see we have a nice hover effect. We still have the option to toggle in between images. And if we maximize this window, so we're on a desktop, this is what it looks like. So with our gallery section, it's going to be super simple. It's going to be just a array of images displayed in a grid. So I'm going to go ahead and add in the images now. Now we'll need to update our JSX. So inside of the return statement in the section, let's add a class name, and we're going to give it some padding on the y-axis, and we're going to set the background color to gray. And if we take a look at it, we can see that this is white and that's gray, so that looks good. So we can go ahead and remove the gallery section text, and let's add in our first div. This div will hold the content of our gallery section, the grid. So we're going to declare a container. We're going to set the margin to auto and give a little padding on the x-axis. Inside the div, let's first start out by adding a H1. And this H1 is going to represent the gallery section. And now that we saved it, we see it appear here on the screen. And inside of the class name, if we just add in a little bit of styling, we see that this is our gallery section. This is the header for it. Underneath the H1 within the div, we're going to add another div, and this is going to be for our grid layout. So we'll give it a class name, and we'll declare grid. On small devices, we want 1 column. On medium devices, we want 2 columns. On large devices and up, we want 3, and we want to have a little bit of gap in between each grid item. Now within this div, we want to loop through this array of gallery images, and for each we want to produce an item. So let's start by bringing in some JavaScript, and we'll say for each gallery item we want to map through, and we're going to call them images or image, and of course we want to pass in the index, and then within this JavaScript we want to pass in a div. This div is going to have the key, and we want to give it a class name, and this is just a little bit of styling for each image. Each image will be placed on this mat, if you will. So we're just giving it a background of white. We're rounding the images. We're going to give it a little bit of shadow, and then on hover we'll like for the image item that's being hovered over to elevate. Now for each item we want to put each string within an image, and the src is going to be image, which we're getting from the image array, the gallery image array, excuse me. And we want to set the alt to gallery image item +1. We know that with indexes they start at 0, so if we add 1 to it, 0 will be 1, 1 will be 2, and so on. Then we want to give this image a class name, and we're going to say the width is full, the height is full, and we want it to cover the object, or we want to set it to object cover, excuse me. Now if we save this and just scroll over, we'll see that the images are now displaying, and as we hover over them, they are elevating off of the y-axis. So it is working as designed, and this should be 6, and it looks like we have 6. And if we go to a desktop version, this is what our gallery section looked like. So this is coming out very well. So we have our Navbar, our HeroSection, and GallerySection. We went over these in prior videos, so feel free to check them out. And with that, I think we are good to go. So we'll work on the product section next. So let's move on to updating or creating our product section. Our product section will be its own component, but it'll also have another component in it, a product card. So in the components directory, let's create another file named productcard.js. And we can just give it a RFCE template for right now and save it. And we can close out the gallery section, and let's go to our product section. Now in it, let's start by importing the products. Once we connect this to a backend, we'll create our own products and add them to the MongoDB database. But until then, let's just create an array of products that we can loop through. And here, all I have is just some pictures that I got from pixels.com, and I added in some fake bike data. If for any of you true bike cyclists out there, forgive me if I misrepresented a name or a price point, or if this is off. This is just for instructional purposes only. So first thing I want to do is we're going to go ahead and make this a client-side component. So we'll bring in use client, and we'll also want to bring in, we'll also bring in the product card component, but let's go ahead and create our product card first. So I'm going to go ahead and remove everything from the product card, and we'll go ahead and create the component. And within it, this is going to take props. We want to use this as a prop so that we can loop through all of the items in the database, but for now through the array. And our product card is going to consist of an image, a name, a description, a category, and a price. So in the return statement, we'll start with the div, and we'll create the foundation or the base of our product card, just giving it a background, rounding the corners, a little bit of shadow, and I like to have some hover effect once we hover over it. Then within the div, we want to pass in the image, and the image is going to take in an SRC, of course, and the alt will be the name of the product. And inside the class name, we just want to set the width, the height, and we want it to cover the primary div or the product card div that this is a child and a parent of, or that this is a child of. We want it to cover that surface. And then we want to add another div, underneath that image with a class name. We want the items that are listed to be listed in a flex direction, and we want to give a little bit of space on the y-axis. And we'll have an H3 with a class name, style the font a little bit, and this will represent the name, and this is going to go inside of that div. And then we want to add a P tag. The P tag is going to represent the description of our product. Then we'll add another div outside of that div. So in the second div will be the H3 of name and description. And then underneath that closing div, we'll add another div. And we want these items to be flex with space in between each item. The first will be a P tag that's going to represent the price. The next P tag is going to represent the category. So let's go ahead and save this file, and we actually can close it out now. Now back in our ProductSection.js, I don't think we needed to make this a client-side component now that I think about it, but it's okay. Let's go ahead and import the product card because we absolutely will need it. And we can go ahead and move down to our return statement inside of the for the JSX. So inside of the section, we'll add in a class name to give our section some padding. We want to have it gray as well. and we'll just set the gray tint to 100. Within this section, let's remove the product section text and let's add in a div. And here we'll set our container, set the margin to auto, and give a little padding on the x-axis. Now within this div, we want to add a H1, that is going to represent the title. So we'll just call this product section. And this is the section that consumers, if they come to our site, will have the ability to see what products we offer and make a purchase. So let's just style the text a little bit. And as you can see, here's the product section text here. Now underneath our H1, the title, we want to add in a div. And this div is going to represent our grid layout. So we'll give a class name and add the grid styling. And this styling layout is the same as the product section, where on small devices we'll have a single column, medium will be 2, large and up will be 3. And we're going to give a little bit of spacing in between each grid item. Then we want to utilize JavaScript to loop over our products array. And for each item, we're going to name it product. And we'll also include the index. And within it, we want to render a product card, assign the key. And we want to destructure the product based on the items listed here. That way we can just create this once, and for each of our items it should create a product. And now that I saved the file, if you take a look at our page, you see we have our product section and it is laid out exactly how we designed it. We have our product here, the image, we have the name of our item, a small description, and we also have the price as well. So it appears that this is working well. And if we take a look at our desktop layout, we see, or the large layout, we see that we have our navbar still here, and in the product section it is transitioned to a 3-column grid layout, and the items are responding as we desire. So next up, we will work on the showcase section. So I think what we'll do, instead of doing a showcase section, we'll just do a newsletter section in its place, the testimonial section in the footer. So I'll go ahead and delete the showcase section, and we'll need to go into the page.js and delete it from here as well. In its place, we'll add a newsletter JS, and we can do RFCE. And go here, and right above or below the testimonial, we'll add the newsletter component. And if we save it, remove the showcase, there we go. And if we scroll down, we see it here on the screen. In the testimonial section, we're going to show some customers leaving testimonies about the service that they receive from our site. So I'll start by bringing in an array of customers that has an image and a name and a brief description of what message they left us. Now we have our array of customers. Next, inside of the section tag, we'll need to add the typical padding on the y-axis, set the color of the section as well, and we see we have it listed there. Remove the testimonial text, replace it with a div with a class name of container, margin set to auto, and we'll give some padding on the x-axis. Now we'll need to add our title, which we will say testimonial section. We'll just say testimonies. Yeah. And we'll give this a class name to style the text a little. And if we save it, we see it listed here. We'll need to create a div to hold our testimonies. And this will be a grid layout. And we're going to use the same grid column layout that we had previously, where we have one on small devices, and on medium devices, we're going to have 3 columns. To loop over our array and display the individual testimonies. So we'll add a little bit of JavaScript and we'll want to map over the testimonials, and we'll call it a testimonial. And we'll also add in an index, and for each one we want to create a div. We'll give it a key of index, and we'll add in a little bit of styling so that we have some styling on our cards. And within the div we'll have another div and give it a class name and set the direction of our items to flex, and we'll center them. And we'll add the image with the src of the testimonial image, which is this image string. The alt will be the testimonial name. A class name, we'll set the height and width, and we'll set the object to cover. And we'll give the divs a h4. This will be to display the testimonial name. And then we'll also want to create a p tag and give some styling so that we can display the testimonial text. So if we save this file and we take a look at our window, we see that our testimonies are now showing up from John Doe and Jan and Alex. So we see that here. So now that we have the testimonial section updated, the next section will be our newsletter, and then we'll complete it out with our footer. All right, so now we'll focus on our newsletter section. So we can go to our components folder, click on newsletter, and we can close out the testimonial. So we'll start by bringing in a few imports, a few icons, React icons, the envelope, and the right arrow. Then we'll update our div from a div to a section, and in it we'll include a class name with the standard padding. And if you take a look, you'll notice that we have the padding here, and this gray is a little more pronounced than the other gray. That's by design. Within the section, we'll add in the div, and here we'll set our container, we'll set the margin, and we'll add a little more padding on the x-axis. Now within this div, we can add in another div, and this div we're going to set the direction of our newsletter section. So we'll set it to flex. We'll have the direction set to column. We'll make some changes when we're in a smaller state. Instead of it being a column, we want it in a row. We'll give some padding on the X and Y axis. And within this div, we want to have another div, and this div is going to represent the text, and we're going to have a H2 within it, and we'll style our H2, and this will state subscribe to our newsletter, kind of like the header of the section, or the title of the section, I should say. And if we scroll down, we'll see it listed right here. Then outside of the H2, we want to have a P tag. And here we're going to ask or suggest that you can stay updated with the latest trends and offers. And if you look at it here, you'll see this text displaying on the screen. And then we'll need another div, and this div is going to hold, and we'll give it a class name for some styling. And we're going to have an input, and this is where you would enter in the email if you wanted to sign up. If you wanted to sign up for our newsletter, this is where you would enter in your email. And just to save it, here's what it looks like. And then as we add the class name to give it some styling, it's going to shift to this. And we're going to add a button, outside of that input, we're going to add a button. And this is just going to be for the right arrow. So we'll add a span within the button. We'll give it a class name to give it a little bit of margin. And then we'll add in the subscribe button. And within the button, but outside of the closing span tag, we're going to add the right arrow just to give it a little more styling. And if we go ahead and just save our file and we take a look at our window, you see that we have the newsletter section listed here. And if we want to look at the desktop version, this is what the newsletter section looks like. So now that we have that updated, the last section we'll need to care for is our footer, and we'll go ahead and work on that now. Okay, so now with our newsletter wrapped up, we can update our footer. So we can close out our newsletter file, and in our footer, we'll go ahead and start with our necessary imports. and we'll have a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn icon. Then we'll create the functional component. Within it, we'll have the footer tag, and we'll give a class name. And we'll set the background to our footer to be the secondary color. We'll set the text color. We'll give some padding on the y-axis, and they also want to give a little bit of a border on our footer as well, so that way you can see the distinction between the newsletter and the footer. Then within the footer, we want to give a class name. This is just to set the standard container and make sure we set the margin to auto. And within this div, we'll add the grid columns, and this is so that our grid is responsive regardless to the size of the viewport. And we'll have the same column layout that we have in the previous sections. And we'll go with a About Us section in the footer first. And this is just a header of a H3, and we're going to have a P tag that says the premier spot for all cycling needs. And outside of that div that we just created, we're going to have another div, and within it we're going to have a header of connect, and we're going to give it an unordered list, and it's going to have a list item. And I chose to make these A tags the list items, but you could easily use spans. You don't have to use the A tag, but we're going to have one for home, we're going to have one for product, we're going to have one for service. And outside of that div that we just created, we're going to have another one that's labeled follow us. To follow us, this is going to indicate or show our social media icons, and they're not connected to a social media site, but you're more than welcome to do so if that's something you choose to do. So we'll place these in a div, and the first A tag will have the we'll have the Facebook icon. The next one will have the Twitter icon, and if we save the file, we'll see them listed here, and I gave them some color and size. The next one will have the Instagram icon, and if we save it, we see that one listed on the screen as well. And the next one, or final one, should be LinkedIn, and we see our LinkedIn icon listed there. And then we'll want to add a contact us type section. So outside of that div, we're going to have another div, and this div is just going to have, it's going to be our contact us section. So we'll have the contact us header, we want to have our email, we want to have a contact number, and then outside of that div, we'll have one more div, and this one is just be all rights reserved. And I haven't clicked, so we change this to go all rights reserved to Wills. And if we save, we'll see that we have our footer listed here. And if we expand it out, this is what our footer looks like on the desktop view. So with that, this cares for our home page layout. Next, we'll work on our About page and then the Contact page. So now with our home page layout cared for, we can start to update the About, Contact, and Product Detail page. But first, we'll start with our About page. So if we go to our app directory, let's create a folder named About. And in it, we're going to add a file named page.js. And this will represent the About page for our e-commerce application. So we'll start by creating the component for the About page, and in it we'll have a div, and we'll give it a class name, and we'll set the background color. We'll give a border, and we'll have the border be the secondary color. And let's just make sure that it is working properly. So we'll go to the menu and click on About, and if we go to About, we see that we have the footer, and we see the secondary border top listed here. And we can actually change this to, we don't have to worry about changing it. So now inside of that div, let's add another div for a class name. And this is going to set our container and give some padding on the Y and X axis. And if we save, we see it updating here, so we know we're good to go. Now we'll initiate. So then we'll go ahead and add in our About Us title. This will represent the About Us page, and just so that the user knows what page they're on. We'll style the text a little bit, and once we style it and save it, we see that the About Us is now perfectly centered in the middle of our page. Outside of that H1 tag, we'll add another div, and this will represent the layout, and we want to have the same grid layout, so 1 column on small devices, 2 on medium and up, and we'll give a little bit of gap between the 2 grid columns as well. Now inside of the div, the first div is going to hold our image, and this will be an image of our company or someone within our company, and we just have this gentleman listed here, and we'll give it a alt of About Us and a class name as well, so we can have some styling. And once we save, we see the borders are rounded and there's a little bit of shadow. Now outside of that div, we'll add another div, and in it we'll give a class name, and we'll have the text be gray, and we'll give it a H2. First we'll give it a H2, and this is just going to represent Welcome to Two Wheels, which is our company. And then below it, we're going to have a P tag, and this is also going to say Welcome to Two Wheels. This is going to be a little bit of description, and we're going to add a few more of these in. Feel free to just copy and paste them if you choose to. And this is just for styling, nothing that's mandatory or necessary to the overall layout. Now, if we save our file and take a look at our page, you see that this is what our About Us page looks like. And if we go to the desktop version, we just have a basic 2-column grid layout. The left column is representing our image, the right column is representing the text, and we have a title, a header, and a description. So with this cares for our About Us page. Next, we'll take care of our contact page. So now we'll move on to update our contact page. So in our app directory, let's add a folder named contact, and in it we'll add a page.js. Inside of the page.js, we'll create a function named contact, and our return statement will have a section that will initially start with we'll give some padding, we'll set the background color, and we'll give a border top as well. And once we click on contact, we see that we now have the section that's gray. We have the border top as well. And within the section tag, we'll start with the div, and this will set our container. We'll give a little bit of padding on the X. We'll set the margin to auto, and we'll also set the height of this container to 900 pixels. Within the div, we'll start with the H2, and this H2 will represent the title, which is going to be Contact Us. We're just giving some styling to the H2, and we can see it displayed here on the screen. Underneath the H2, we want to have another div, and this div is going to represent the layout of the content on our page. And we're going to have the traditional grid layout, and we'll give a little bit of gap in between our columns on the medium devices. Inside of that div, we're going to have another div, and we'll start with the H3. And this H3 is just going to say to get in touch with us. We'll give some styling to the text. Then we'll have a P tag, and we'll give it a class name, and the text within it is just going to say, hey, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And we're going to have a form that a customer can submit to us. So we'll go ahead and add in that form now. And within the form, we'll give a little bit of space on the y-axis, and we'll start with the div. And we want the direction of the items within this div to be flex, and we'll give that flex direction of column. And within the div, we'll ask the user to enter in their name, and we'll have an input field for it, and we'll give it some styling. And once we save, we see that this is the name field listed on the screen. And underneath that div, we'll have another div, and in this div is going to represent the consumer to enter in an email. So we'll give it a label, we'll give it an input of email, and we'll give it some styling as well. And if we save it, we see the email listed here on the screen and what it looks like. Now under that div, we're going to have another div, and in this one we're going to have the message. So this will be a text area, and we create a label for it. That way we can have the visuals there. We'll give it a class name for styling, and we'll set the rows. And if we save it, we see we have the message text area listed. And then underneath that div, we're going to have a button, and this button is going to be for submit. We'll give it some styling, and we'll just say to send a message, you click this button. And underneath this form, underneath the form closing tag, underneath that div closing tag, we're going to add another div, and then this is just going to be some contact information for our store. So we'll give a H3, and we'll give it some styling, and we'll say if you want to visit us, and here's the section for it right here. And then under that H3, we'll add a P tag. Here's our location. And once we save it, you'll see we're listed here. And then we'll use the HTML address tag to list out our address. Want to give it some styling, and we'll just say our street address is 123 Shoe Street. We'll add in the break tag. That way we can have a break in between the lines. And then we'll say that we're in Footwear City. We'll give another break, and we're in Shoe Land, and that's our zip code. So if we save it, we'll see that this is what that text looks like. And then underneath that underneath the address closing tag, we're going to add an H3. We're going to give it a class name, and this is just another styling section to say if you want to reach out to us. Here's that information. So we have the text right there. And then underneath that H3, we'll have a P tag, and we'll give it a class name for styling. And we'll just say that here's information if you want to contact us via phone or email. And then here's the text. And then under that P tag, we're going to have one more P tag. Within it, we'll give it a class name. We'll list our email. Then we're going to include a break right here. That way we can add more information. And then we're going to say our phone number is listed here. So it looks like this is starting to roll over into our footer. So what we can do is we can see what it looks like by removing the height. And if we remove the height, it automatically sets to be within this container. So we'll just do it without the height, and it comes out fine. But this is what our contact section looks like. We have the contact title, we have the padding section. We have a little border on the top of the section. We have the title for Contact Us, and then we have the 2-column grid layout. One column has the contact form, and the other column has our contact information. So with our contact section cared for, the only page left to update is our product detail page, and we'll work on that next. With our contact page cared for, the last page we'll need to build is our product detail page. So in the app folder, let's create a folder or directory, named product. And in it, we're going to add another directory with bracket ID bracket or open bracket ID close bracket. This is going to represent a dynamic ID, and the way this will work is with the full page or with the full application, you'll click on a product from the home page. So from the home page, the way this will work is you'll click on a product, and then this product will have an ID, and then it will redirect you to the product detail page based on the ID. So on the page.js, that's within the ID folder, which is within the product folder, which is within the app folder. Let's begin to type out our code. Let's start by creating a component, and within our section tag, let's add a class name, and we're going to add some styling to our page. Within the section, we're going to add a div, and within our div, we're going to give it a class name, and we want to create our container, and we want to make sure we set the margin to auto and give a little padding on the x-axis. So let's go ahead for right now. Let's go to this page so that we could just make sure and we can put anything in for the ID. That way we can make sure that we get something. There we go. Okay, so right now, if you update your local host to go to product/ and then whatever for the ID, because there isn't an ID technically created just yet, you should be redirected to this particular URL. And once you're on this URL and you have this set up in the app directory, you should have this page displayed. So now within our div, our container, let's add another div, and we'll give it a class name. And in this div, it's going to hold the actual content. So we want to create a flex container, and we want the direction to be in a column. And on medium devices, we want a row. On small devices, we want the flex direction to be column, and on medium devices, we want a row. And we'll center the items, and we'll start with the image. And if we take a look, we see that we have an image on our screen, and we'll give it a class name just to give some styling and to give some responsiveness, to the image based on the viewport. And underneath the image closing tag, we want to have another div. And within this div, we're going to add a H2. And this will be the positioning for our name, the name of the product. And next, we'll add a P tag, and we'll give some styling. And this one will be for the description. And we'll add another P tag underneath that closing P tag, and this will be for the category. And we're hard coding this information in now, the image src, the name, the description, and the category. Reason being is because it's not being passed dynamically. Once we connect it to a backend, you'll click on a product, and then this will be populated via JavaScript, and the information will be passed to this component as a prop. So now that we have our name, description, and category, let's add another P tag. This one is going to represent the price, and we'll hard code in $5.99. And underneath that closing P tag, we'll add a div, and this div is just going to be for you to select the amount of items, the quantity. So we'll add a label so you can have a description of quantity. So we'll have the input, we'll add a class name for styling, we'll make sure we set the type to number, and we'll give it an ID of quantity. And then underneath that input, we'll add another P tag. This P tag will be to show the total based on the cost of the item and the amount of items that you'll like to purchase. And then of course we'll need to have a button, and this button is going to represent adding the item to the cart, which is listed here. So we have a name of the item, which will be presented here, the description, which will be presented here, the category, which will be presented here, the cost of the item, and then the quantity. And then as you adjust the quantity, the price will update, and then you have the ability to add the cart, and it will update the cart here in the navbar. So there you have it. This concludes out our product detail page. Stay tuned for the setup of our backend and connecting our front-end application to a database.